存在知识及尺度，穷尽真理，根除谬误。
就以奇珍万千给一心同归。
说答案，0分。
敌人刷新了呀！
负分。0分。
咱们还是以和为贵。
Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. The long-awaited Dr.Ratio of the Intelligentsia Guild finally arrived to distribute knowledge to cure the persistent disease named ignorance. This guide will cover his kit, traces, eidolons, relics, and lightcone builds, team comps, and more. Stay tuned to find out. Dr.Ratio is a 5-star imaginary hunt character who has high synergy with debuff effects and specialized in quickly disposing high threats target with his follow-up attacks. Let's take a look at his kit to find out exactly how he plans to distribute his knowledge to the enemies. Dr.Ratio skills show your enemies some basic geometry stuff, and when the enemy spazzed out due to stupid, he will launch a chalk at their forehead to knock what's left of their brain cells off. The chalk is a part of his talent which we will cover right now. When using his skill, Dr.Ratio has a 40% fixed chance of launching a follow-up attack against his target for one time, dealing imaginary damage. For each debuff the enemy has, the fixed chance of launching follow-up attack increases by 20%. So if we do a bit of quick math, then the target needs at least 3 debuffs for his skill to guarantee the talent's prop. If the target enemy is defeated before the follow-up attack triggers, the follow-up attack will be directed at a single random enemy instead. This is particularly useful in contents that have multiple waves of enemy like the Memory of Chaos. If you defeat the last enemy of a wave with his skill, Dr.Ratio will immediately fires a follow-up attack at a random enemy on the following wave since they were late to class. Now things begin to get interesting. His ultimate deals imaginary damage to a single target enemy and applies Wiseman's Folly. When Dr.Ratio's allies attack the target afflicted with Wiseman's Folly, Dr.Ratio will launch his talent's follow-up attack for one time against this target. Wiseman's Folly can be triggered for up to 2 times and only affects the most recent target of Dr.Ratio's ultimate, and this trigger count resets after Dr.Ratio's ultimate is used. Pay attention class, you can find 2 dots above his health bar indicate the number of time Wiseman's Folly can take effects, and after your allies attack the target and trigger Dr.Ratio talent 2 times, the stacks are gone. Do note that Wiseman's Folly does not count as a debuff for the purpose of his talent trigger chance, and if the target is defeated before you can use all of Wiseman's Folly stacks, then he will lose the stacks without triggering any follow-up attacks, so don't use Dr.Ratio's ultimate on low health targets. As for his technique, Dr.Ratio creates a special dimension that taunts nearby enemies, lasting for 10 seconds. After entering battle with enemies in this special dimension, there is a 100% base chance to reduce each single enemy target's speed by 15% for 2 turns. This base chance is affected by effect hit rate, so EHR is not completely wasted on him. Only one dimension created by allies can exist at the same time. This counts as a debuff to increase his talent trigger chance. There are currently 4 characters that have dimension-type technique. It is Himiko, Jinglu, and Dr.Ratio. For his Ascension abilities, Ascension 2 gives Dr.Ratio 2.5% crit rate and 5% crit damage for every debuff on the target of his skill. This effect can stack up to 6 times and is a permanent bonus in combat. This helped Dr.Ratio immensely, let him have an easier time reaching a high crit rate as every single one of his skills only hit a single time. Missing crit feels very bad. Ascension 4 gives Dr.Ratio a 100% base chance to reduce the target of his skill effect resistance by 10% for 2 turns. This helps his teammates apply debuffs to your enemies easier, reducing their effect hit rate requirements. and with Ascension 6, when dealing damage to a target that has 3 or more debuffs, for each debuff the target has, the damage dealt by Dr. Ratio to this target increased by 10% up to a maximum increase of 50%. So you would want to apply 5 debuffs to take full advantage of this Ascension. As for his stat bonus traces, they add up in total of 28% attack, 12% crit rate, and 12.5% defense. For ability traces, you would want to prioritize his talent, then ultimate and skill, and his basic attack for last. At E0, Dr. Ratio is already the undisputed strongest single target damage dealer, which is massive for new players since everyone will get a free copy of him. However, let's take a look at his Eidolons and see what they add. E1 gives Dr. Ratio's Ascension 2-4 maximum stack counts and immediately gives him 4 stacks when the battle begins. Then E2 let his talent's follow-up attack deals additional imaginary damage equal to 20% of Dr. Ratio's attack for each debuff the target has, this capped out at 4 debuffs. Essentially gives an 80% additional attack scaling to his talent, brings it to a whopping 350% attack scaling at max trace level. E4 is also very impactful as firing follow-up attacks with his talent now additionally generate 15 energy for Dr. Ratio. This let him achieve 2 turns ultimate cycling instead of 4 turn normally, which is just insane. And finally, his E6 additionally increases the triggerable count for Wiseman's Folly by 1. The damage dealt by the talent's follow-up attack increased by 50%, which is your average E6 do big damage wow moment. I much prefer something with more substances. His E2 is the sweet spot if you plan to invest more into him, but his signature lightcone is the better choice in my opinion. Dr. Ratio's signature lightcone, Baptism of Pure Thoughts, gives him an additional 20% crit damage. For every debuff on the enemy target, the wearer's crit damage dealt against this target increased by 8%, stacking up to 3 times. When using ultimate to attack the enemy target, the wearer receives the disputation effect, which increased damage dealt by 36% and enables their follow-up attacks to ignore 24% of the target's defense. This effect lasts for 2 turns. We already know how broken defense ignore effects stacking is, so there is no doubt that this is his best in slot lightcone. His next best option is Topaz's lightcone, Worrisome, Blissful, which increase his crit rate, crit damage, and follow-up attacks damage. Dr. Ratio can utilize all of these bonuses effectively. Coming up next is everyone's favorite Hunt's lightcone, Cruising in the Stellar Sea, which can easily be S5. This lightcone can potentially gives a massive 32% crit rate, but its secondary effect of 40% attack increase for 2 turns after defeating an enemy have some questionable uptimes since Dr. Ratio do not have any AE damage source and rather focus all his damage on a single high threat enemy. The last option among the 5-star light cone is Yanqing's Sleep Like the Dead. This light cone gives high crit damage bonus and massive additional crit rate for 1 turn after you miss a crit, which will somewhat solve his seal problem, but it has a cooldown and can only be active every 3 turns. Moving on to his 4-star options, we have Swordplay and Only Silent Remains as 2 viable light cone. Swordplay is theoretically very powerful, but Dr. Ratio have a difficult time stacking the bonus to full as all of his attacks only hit once, and by the time you get the full 5 stacks the enemy would be very low health already. As for Only Silent Remains, any fight that have 3+ enemies or their summons will ruin this light cone. I do not recommend any of the 3-star light cone. With that out of the way, let's move on to relic choices. For the body piece, go with crit rate or crit damage, depends on what give you a good crit rate / crit damage ratio. Try to aim for at least 70% crit rate and 170% crit damage. This shouldn't be too hard since his traces already gives him 12% crit rate. For his boots, attack percent and speed is interchangeable, they have negligible differences in my test, just use ones with the best crit substats. For his orb, you can use either imaginary damage percent or attack percent, whichever have the higher crit substats. I cannot stress this enough. Now for Dr. Ratio Relic sets. For 4 set bonus you would want to use the Wastelander of Banditry Desert set for 10% imaginary damage and a plus 10% crit rate when attacking enemies with debuffs. The 20% conditional crit damage boost on imprisoned targets is icing on the cake since it doesn't have a great uptime. Another outstanding option is the Genius of Brilliant Stars set. This set has great synergy with his lightcone and defense reduced characters. For the 2-piece you can use any combination of these relic sets for great results. They all perform competitively with each other, making only 1% difference in most scenarios. With that said, I do recommend farming for these 2 sets since you can farm them from the same Cavern of Corrosion stage, and the Prisoner in Deep Confinement set is amazing for Black Swan if you're waiting for her. For his planar ornaments set I recommend the Inert Salsado since 8% crit rate will help immensely in reaching your crit goals, but if you have good crit substats in any of these 3 sets then just use them, they perform very similarly. Now when it comes to Dr. Ratio team synergies we can split into 3 roles: debuffer, buffer, and sustain. His best debuffer is clearly Silver Wolf. She can reliably apply 6 debuffs, letting Dr. Ratio takes full advantage of his talent and traces. Reducing enemies' defense have amazing synergy with Dr. Ratio Lightcone and the Genius of Brilliant Star set. Next up is Pella. She can apply 3 debuffs on the first turn with Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat Lightcone, letting Dr. Ratio have 100% talent proc chance when using his skill. She can also shred defense like Silver Wolf and come with a quite good advantage of being AoE debuff. This let Dr. Ratio change his attack target without worrying about reapplying debuffs. One downside of Pella is her debuff uptime can be inconsistent. Ginelefin is also a good choice as she can apply 3 debuffs with Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat Lightcone. Her talent makes enemies take increased damage is also a very nice bonus. Special mention goes to Topaz as she is a sub-DPS that have high synergy with character that use follow-up attack. She can also apply 3 debuffs at E1S1. I can't talk much about her for now because I have only tested her with E0S0 and the performance wasn't great, need further testing. Now let's move on to the buffer's character. 3 strongest options right now is definitely Wanmei with her 100% uptime damage % buff, resistance penetration, and 1 debuff with her ultimate. Bronya with her 100% action advance, huge damage bonus, ATK %, and crit damage buff. Tinglin work amazingly with Dr. Ratio due to his massive 140 energy requirement. Tinglin's skill deserve a special mention because every single one of Dr. Ratio follow-up attacks proc benediction damage bonus. She is potentially the best support for him. For the sustain slot there is no other choice to boost his damage further other than Huahua and excellent battery and attack % buffers. If you don't have Huahua then you can use any other sustain character here. Best choice would be Fu Xuan for her amazing protective power and most importantly 12% crit rate boost. Trust me on this, missing crit on Dr. Ratio is the worst feeling you will ever face. That's all I got for this Dr. Ratio guide. I will have to do further testing to figure out some of his hidden team synergy. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It would help me a lot. Thank you, and until next time, Ratio Education out.